So today we're going to be talking about Frutiger Eco. Now, Frutiger Eco is a type, I guess you could call it a subcategory of Frutiger Aero, and it's essentially Frutiger Aero that has to do with nature, environmentalism, the idea of like going green. It often revolves around themes such as globes, the colors green and blue, a lot of nature, a lot of swooshes and glossy things. It's basically imagine Frutiger Aero and just sort of greenify it. And there you have Frutiger Eco. Oh, don't forget the windmills. Lots of windmills. Wind turbines, if you will. It's very utopic. It is very optimistic. So those are some of the visual aspects of the aesthetic. I'm talking about the sort of feelings and the thoughts and ideas behind the aesthetic. Well, just like its main parent aesthetic, I guess, Frutiger Aero, it feels very futuristic, very nature-based. It is very optimistic. There's a lot of tech in there, and there's a lot of just that vibe of like change and hope. And it happened in the years from around 2008 to, I would say, maybe 2015. What else happened around that time? Wait, let me think. Yeah, the Obama era. I'm talking about the intertwining of Frutiger Eco, the consumer aesthetic, not even consumer, just the worldwide aesthetic. It was also used in like government branding and promotional material, and we're going to be talking about that with the Obama era, and I'm going to be talking about the values of the time, the zeitgeist of the time, and why it makes total sense that Frutiger Eco overlapped with this era of time. A lot of the Frutiger Eco era has to do with environmentalism, with change, with hope, with optimism, with using tech to enhance our lives, and a lot of that nature and natural imagery. And so I think that a lot of the zeitgeist that was prevalent during the Obama era kind of shared some of those values. A feeling of change. There was definitely, I think, a feeling of hope. Remember, we're kind of like at the turn of the century here, and just a little bit after the turn of the century. And now we're like rolling into the late 2000s and the early 2010s. We're innovating. Everything's good. We made it through Y2K. Now it's time to build. And so to build, to change, to innovate was sort of a big part of it. And I think that was just something that was part of the overall zeitgeist of the era. I think that Frutiger Eco didn't just coincide with this era of time, but I think that they actually contingent upon each other and very much intertwined. And Frutiger Eco was sort of born out of the motifs of the time. Now, just to like make things clear, I don't think anyone like actually sat down in a room and got together and were all like, we're going to make a new design style. We're going to be calling it Frutiger Eco. Well, I know it definitely wasn't called Frutiger Eco. That's very much a posthumous name. But I think it sort of subconsciously happened gradually and by a bunch of different people. I don't think it was like some centralized decision. It kind of just sort of evolved that way, kind of like a lot of consumer aesthetics do. And the reason why I think consumer aesthetics are like this in the first place is just because the concept of trends sort of, I think, stems from a lot of people's subconscious thoughts and feelings that they're having. And I think that itself is very dependent on the era. And so if people are having these similar motifs, if there's this prevalent zeitgeist throughout the era, I think that the consumer aesthetics and the designs that are going to evolve and emerge during that time period are very much going to reflect those inner subconscious thoughts and those ideas and those feelings that are living in that era. Now, something that is very much intertwined with Frutiger Eco, and that was also a very prevalent topic in the society at the time, was global warming. And it was kind of like the biggest thing of our elementary education. It was like recycling. It was global warming. It was, we have to do green energy. We have to do electric stuff. I just remember that being very, very prevalent. So Frutiger Eco and global warming are, I think, definitely intertwined. I wanted to talk a little bit about some examples that I've picked out from, I guess, the Obama era, from that era of time, that I think kind of reflect Frutiger Eco in some way. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is actually My Plate. If you grew up in the school system in America, then there's a good chance you'll remember My Plate. It was probably hanging up in the cafeteria. You had to eat certain lunch foods on your plate because you had to get the certain amount of nutrients to fulfill the My Plate requirements that every school was given. Now, the whole idea of My Plate in itself, I guess, kind of stems also from this sort of utopic thinking, but I definitely do think it comes from a place of like, let's change something about society, let's make things more utopic, let's evolve. And I do think this was part of the subconscious thoughts of Frutiger Eco as well. And even the graphics of the MyPlate logo and the like instructional like posters that they would give the schools was of course designed in the Frutiger Aero style, sometimes even the Frutiger Eco style. A lot of things surrounding school lunch during that time, whether it be the branding, the logos, I don't even know what, just the design of it was kind of very much Frutiger Eco, because especially food companies, like food companies, energy companies, those type of like human industry, I don't even know what you would call those kind of companies. I'm going to find the word for that later and put it here. So another example of something emerging during this time period that kind of follows the Frutiger Eco vibe is, in my opinion, I think certain suburbs, certain subdevelopments, certain neighborhoods, I think really actually followed this aesthetic. Just the way the houses were set up and built and organized, even the materials used, I guess even sometimes the promotional posters, flyers, advertisement information that had to do with these communities sort of follows this organized, utopic, kind of structured, optimistic, techie sort of vibe of the time. And not to say that like a subdevelopment is Frutiger Eco, but anytime you have these companies, like I said, like energy, food, I guess we can include like home and city development into that. So next I am going to mention the corporate world, because you can't not. Basically, the easiest way to tell what the aesthetic of the time is to just take a look at what those corporations are doing. That's where a lot of this stuff originates. That's why a lot of it is even invented in the first place. That's where it's most prevalent. That's where things are changing the most and the most, I guess, accurate to the time. And if you look at the corporate world during 2008 to 2015, that is very much Frutiger Eco right there. Business spaces, logos. Some offices are just very beautiful Frutiger Eco. I do really think there is something that speaks to the inner nature of humans, something that speaks to that comfort in nature that the aesthetic kind of brings to the table. I think, yeah, Frutiger Eco was definitely utilized a lot by the corporate world, definitely in office jobs, in finance, in medicine, in health, in schools even too, for sure. But basically everywhere in the corporate world, you could pretty much spot this design. And going off the topic of schools, I think the introduction of iPads in schools sort of went along with it. And it definitely went along with the whole zeitgeist and the whole motto of Frutiger Aero at the time too. But I think the Frutiger Eco aspect is just a little bit more involved regarding like sort of the fields I mentioned before, whether it be like environmental, energy, health, food industry. And I'm going to include schools as part of that. Anything that you're going to be learning about in your sociology class, I think those fields especially embraced the Frutiger Eco design style, because I think it really aligned with a lot of the motivations for those fields. So yeah, I'm going to include introducing iPads in schools at this time and the emergence of ed tech. I guess I'm kind of just lumping it in there as stuff that happened during this time that has to do with tech optimism, with future, with change, and with utopia. So those were sort of my thoughts on the matter, my thoughts on Frutiger Eco, my thoughts on that era of time, that 2008 to 2015 sort of era, the Obama era. Now it's time for the last part of the show, where I'll be reading some reviews, opinions, discussions, and comments on my previous podcast, as well as emails and suggestions that I receive. There's some pretty cool insights coming up. From my previous video on YouTube, Adelator says, I was a GUI designer at the time. I did work for Microsoft, among others. This was just one of the designs at the time we didn't have a name for. I wouldn't mind seeing it come back, but I'm not asking for it. At Caitlin_L says, I would point out the 2010 to 2015 rush into flat design was itself already nostalgic. After all, it was a reaction to the gloss push of the 2000s. People called the glossy UIs tacky and overplayed. They were nostalgic for the flatter, denser UIs from the early 90s. Late 90s GUIs got more 3D-ified, but web pages, etc. kept the flat and simple look during the millennial turnover. Then OS X and XP came out, which both did glossy in their own ways. That became the norm, even into the design of the hardware, with the glossy piano black, etc. 2010's flat was a reaction, and now the neo-gloss is another counter-reaction. So I'm sure there will be a nostalgia for that incarnation of flat design eventually. I expect this pendulum will forever swing back and forth with regard to the right amount of ornamentation. After all, the visual art world has always had periods where abstraction is king, then realism, then abstraction again. DJS Strooper /C5X says, agreed, Frutiger Aero isn't about the aesthetic, but about how the designers wanted people to feel happy using it. Frutiger Aero just happens to be the aesthetic that makes people happy. That's what they should focus on. Lurkin Little Squares 6691 says, the Frutiger Aero appeal is definitely in the emotion. It feels whimsy, human, tied to nature, the blues and greens, and the almost unnaturally yet relatable to nature type of idealized skies and plants. Dovias /V3V says, I don't think it's the Frutiger Aero itself is what people like nowadays, but the connections that previous designs had in mind back then. Look at LG's motto, life's good, and Samsung Galaxy's backgrounds with dandelions or people with balloons. People had a sense of connection with the design. It felt like the design had connections with itself. Nowadays, design has seemed to have lost that, and only recently the connection part is starting to have a comeback with designs like Material You, which incorporate subtle elements that make the design more human and less boring. Now, just me speaking here, I actually agree with the first part of the comment, but I kind of want to stop it there when it's starting to talk about Material You and other modern UI designs, because I actually tend to think that those definitely are not following with the same emotional motivations as Frutiger Aero was, and I don't think they share a similar humanistic vibe at all, especially not Material You, which there's not even nature in that either. These are all the comments for today. If you have something to say, then you can reach out to me at undefined_100 at outlook.com. That's undefined_100 at outlook.com. If you write a 5-star review on whichever platform you're listening on, I guarantee to read it out loud on the next show. And of course, my YouTube and other social media accounts are always linked down below if you're interested in additional content or just want to reach out. Thanks for listening.